I certainly share Christopher's distaste with religious fundamentalism of any type, and I certainly do worry about American democracy and the very real threat they impose to it. But I think he's conflated religion with tribalism. And I think Hitchens sees only one form of religion, the chauvinistic, the bigoted, and the intolerant brand that was embodied in the idiotic pronouncements of figures such as the late Reverend Jerry Falwell or Pat Robertson. He assures us in his book that religion spoke its last intelligible or noble or inspiring words a long time ago. It may speak about the bliss of the next world, he writes, but it wants power in this one. Religion is a product of the bawling and fearful infancy of our species, and all attempts, he assures us, to reconcile faith with science and reason are consigned to failure and ridicule. It's easy, increasingly popular, to attack this childish belief system. But by doing this, we refuse to deal with the nuances and depth of religious faith. Hitchens ignores in his book the great moral and ethical struggles by theologians and religious leaders such as Tillich or Karl Barth, who have attempted to root religion in contemporary society. He never confronts the anguish faced by millions of believers around the world who recognize the impulses we carry within us for evil as well as good. And I think he's unequipped to deal with religious belief, trying vainly to argue against its authenticity. He writes in his book of Dr. Martin Luther King that in no real as opposed to nominal sense was he a Christian. He disparages the faith of Abraham Lincoln and assures us that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who was put to death by the Nazis for resistance, was the product of a religious belief that had mutated into an admirable but nebulous humanism. This is a cheap way to avoid the harder task of exploring the wide range of religious experience, of examining the motivations and beliefs of those who come out of a religious tradition and strive to live the moral life. He's determined to demonize religion, and he would have us believe that self-professed religious leaders such as King or Bonhoeffer were not really religious. And in this, he is in fact an ally of the very religious bigots he denounces. The sophistry of this argument mirrors the sophistry of those who misuse the Bible to champion Genesis as the factual account of creation and to persecute homosexuals, Muslims, women, artists, intellectuals, and those they brand with a curse of secular humanist in the name of God. The problem is not religion. The problem is religious orthodoxy and the form it takes in human institutions. Most moral thinkers, from Socrates to Christ to Francis of Assisi, eschewed the written word. Once moral teachings are written down, they become, in the wrong hands, codified and used to enforce conformity, subservience, and repression. Writing freezes speech. George Steiner calls this the decay into writing. Language has turned from a living and fluid form of moral inquiry to a tool of bondage. The moment the writers of the gospel set down the words of Jesus, they began to kill the message. There is no room for prophets within religious institutions, indeed within any institution. For as Tillich knew, all human institutions, including the church, are inherently demonic. Tribal societies persecute and silence prophets. Open societies tolerate them at their fringes. And our prophets today usually do not come from the church, but from our artists, poets, and writers who follow, as I believe Socrates and Jesus did, their inner authority, an authentic religious impulse. Those who deform faith into creeds, who use it as a litmus test for institutional and personal fidelity, root religion in a profane rather than a sacred context. They seek, like all who worship idols, to give the world a unity and coherence it does not possess. They ossify the message, and once ossified, faith withers. There are many theologians, including Tillich, Barth, and Reinhold Niebuhr, who brand the version of religion Hitchens attacks as idolatry, as false and dangerous. And he's right in going after this form of belief. He's wrong in assuming that it is religion. What he fails to acknowledge is the supreme importance of the monotheistic traditions in creating the very concept of the individual. This individualism, the belief that we can exist as distinct beings from the tribe or the crowd, and that we are called on as individuals to make moral decisions that at times defy the clamor of the tribe or the nation, is an important gift of the Abrahamic faiths. This sense of individual responsibility is coupled with the constant injunctions in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity for a deep altruism, and this laid the foundations for our open society. This individualism is the central doctrine and perhaps the most important contribution of monotheism. We are enjoined, after all, to love our neighbor, not our tribe. This empowerment of individual conscience is the starting point of the great ethical systems of our civilization. The prophets, along with Jesus, helped institutionalize dissent and criticism. They initiated the separation of powers. They reminded us that culture and society was not the sole prerogative of the powerful, that freedom, and indeed the religious life, often required us to oppose and defy those in authority. This is a distinctly anti-tribal outlook. Immanuel Kant built his ethics upon this radical individualism, and Kant's injunction to always recognize that human individuals are ends and do not use them as mere means runs in a direct line from the Christian Gospels. Karl Popper rightly pointed out in the first volume of The Open Society and Its Enemies, when he writes about this empowerment of the individual versus the crowd, that there is no other thought which has been so powerful in the moral development of man. These religions, in a very real sense, set free the critical powers of humankind. Believers in the Bible and the Quran were called to embrace an abstract, universal deity. This deity could not be captured in pictures, statues, or any concrete, iconographic form. God exists in the Word and through the Word, an unprecedented idea in much of the ancient world that required the highest order of abstract thinking. In the beginning, the Gospel of John reads, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is why the second of the Ten Commandments prohibits Israelites from making concrete images of God. Iconography thus becomes blasphemy, Neil Postman wrote, so that a new kind of God could enter a culture. God, as Hitchens notes correctly, is a human concept. God is the name we give to our belief that life has meaning, one that transcends the world's chaos, randomness, and cruelty. To argue about whether God exists or does not exist is futile. The question is not whether God exists. The question is whether we concern ourselves with or are utterly indifferent to the sanctity and ultimate transcendence of human existence. God is that mysterious force, and you can give it many names, as many religions do, which works upon us and through us to seek and achieve truth, beauty, and goodness. God is perhaps best understood as our ultimate concern, that in which we should place our highest hopes, confidence, and trust. And I think God is better understood as a verb rather than a noun. God is not an asserted existence, but a process accomplishing itself. And God is inescapable. It is the life force that sustains, transforms, and ultimately defines existence. The name of God is laden, thanks to our religious institutions and the numerous tyrants, charlatans, and demagogues these institutions produced, with so much baggage and imagery that it's hard for us to see the intent behind the concept. All societies and cultures have struggled to describe these forces. It is why Freud avoided writing about the phenomena of love. It is by the seriousness of our commitments to compassion, indeed our ability to sacrifice for the other, especially for the outcast and the stranger, our commitment to justice, the core message of the prophets, that we alone can measure the quality of faith. This is the true meaning of faith. As Matthew wrote, by their fruits shall you know them. Professed faith, What we say we believe is not faith. It is an expression of loyalty to a community, to our tribe. Faith is what we do. This is real faith. And faith is the sister of justice. Those who silenced Jesus represented all human societies, not the Romans or the Jews. When Jesus attacks the chief priests, scribes, lawyers, Pharisees, Sadducees, and other blind guides, he is attacking forms of oppression as endemic to Christianity as to all religions and all ideologies and all institutions. If civil or religious authority enforces an iron and self-righteous conformity among members of a community, then faith is transformed into ideology. Faith is not in conflict with reason. Faith does not conflict with scientific truth unless faith claims to express a scientific truth. Faith can neither be affirmed nor denied by scientific, historical, or philosophical truth. And here I think Hitchens confuses the irrational, which he sees as an endemic part of faith, with the non-rational. There is a spiritual dimension to human existence and the universe, but this is not irrational. It is non-rational. Faith allows us to transcend what Flaubert said was our mania for conclusions, a mania he described as one of humanity's most useless and sterile drives. The sole reliance on reason, faith in human reason, allows us to ignore the dark Freudian undercurrents that lead to self-worship. And it leads to a dangerous form of idolatry, a form of faith, certainly, but one most of the biblical writers knew led to evil and eventually self-destruction. Hitchens states that the whole record will show, first, that person for person, American freethinkers and agnostics and atheists come out the best. He assures us that someone's secular or free-thinking opinion would cause him or her to denounce injustice. This assertion, coming from an apologist for the war in Iraq, for the crime of aggression committed by the Bush administration in our name, is, to say the least, rich. The danger, which I think Hitchens fails to see, is not Islam or Christianity or any other religion. It is the human heart, the capacity we all have for evil. All human institutions, including religious institutions, with a lust for power, give their utopian visions divine sanction. Whether this comes through the worship of God, destiny, historical inevitability, the master race, a worker's paradise, fraternité, égalité, liberté, or the second coming of Jesus Christ. And religion is often a convenient vehicle for this bloodlust. Religious institutions often sanctify genocide. But this says more about us, about the nature of human institutions and the darkest human yearnings than it does about religion. His book finally externalizes evil. And when you externalize evil, all tools, including violence and torture, become legitimate. This is an assault on what he defines as the irrational force of religion. But once we begin this assault, it permits us to sanction the abuse and subjugation of others. This is done in the name of another particular version of goodness, the goodness of reason. But this too is a false god, an idol. Once you wage unprovoked wars and embrace torture, you unleash sadists and killers. You consign other human beings to moral oblivion. You become no better than those you oppose. Hitchens does what fundamentalists do. He embraces a self-serving and I think finally simplistic view of religion and the world. And this allows him to create an illusion of a binary world of us and them, of reason versus irrationality, of the forces of light battling the forces of darkness. And once you set up this vision, it becomes possible to view anything that will subdue what is defined as irrational and dangerous as necessary. Necessity, William Pitt wrote, is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. Thank you.